Oliveira, Oliveira Lawyers. Today is Wednesday, October the 29th, 12:30 Rio de Janeiro time. We are starting one more live stream. And as usual, if you are participating live, you have a priority to have topics of your interest discussed here live. And just a heads up, we can comment topics in general. We cannot provide too specific advice because according to the Brazilian Bar Association, attorneys are not supposed to provide a free advisory, all right? So bear with me, understand that we can discuss about things in general, but not in the specifics. And naturally, if you need a specific advisory, you are more than welcome to schedule and book a consultation with us. All right, so let's get started. We have Josh. Welcome to the live stream, Josh. Josh says, hola. All right, Josh, hola. I hope you're doing well. And let's see what else we have. We have Matt and Adrian. Good to have you guys over here. Matt says, boa tarde, Dr. Oliveira. Boa tarde, Matt. I hope you're doing well. And we have a Donna. Good day, Luciano. All right, good to see you over here, Donna. We have our friends as usual. Let's take a look at the news. Let's see if there is something interesting. Today we're going to take a look at UOL. And this is the main headline. It is addressing a very unfortunate event yesterday in Rio de Janeiro. The state police and soldiers as well, they have they made an operation in a couple of favelas, right? Favelas is how we call some of the, the areas around the hills, and those areas they are typically seized by organized crime, right? And most of the governors and the mayors in Rio de Janeiro, they kind of led those areas aside. And typically, the police force cannot get into those areas, right? There is like an unwritten kind of rule saying, listen, police forces cannot cross a certain line, right? So there was this very, very meaningful effort by the Rio de Janeiro police under the governor's authority. With at least, as far as I remember, about 2,500 policemen and soldiers, right? And there was like a large number of people who died in the operation, like about, they're talking about 100 people, and probably an even larger number of criminals arrested during the operation, right? So nowadays, unfortunately, organized crime has been growing in Brazil, and eventually the government will need to do something about it. Now, very interesting to note, right? Because like most of you, if not all of you, are foreign citizens. Particularly in Rio de Janeiro, there is this kind of rhythm of life in which like the criminals avoid like bothering, right, like the citizens in general. So they're more focused on drug dealing and trafficking, right? Like naturally, this is not good. It does not matter if they are not like harassing or harming other citizens. Is still like a criminal activity. But I'm sharing just so you have the right understanding. Despite all of that, I guarantee today in Rio de Janeiro, pretty much everything is working as usual, and nobody is scared for anything, right? But again, I think that this reality in which police officers cannot go to a certain area is pretty much unacceptable, right, in any type of society. So, despite the large number of dead people, which is very unfortunate, no matter who died, I would say there is a need for something to happen to kind of control or keep under control this growth of criminal organizations in Brazil, if you will. That's my opinion. All right, let's take a look again at the chat. Let's see if people are warming up in terms of comments. We have Cherwin. Good to see you, Cherwin. Good day. I hope all is well with you. My friends in Rio sent me some videos of what's going on in Rio. Yes, Cherwin, we just spoke about that. It was very intense. And by the way, like in our office, some of our team members, they went home like earlier in the day just because traffic got very chaotic, right? And one of our team members, he said, I think I'm going to have to sleep in the office because traffic was just too brutal. But he ended up going home like at the end of the day, all right? But yes, it was something very exceptional. Like I said, typically and traditionally, the governors, the mayors in Rio de Janeiro, they just don't care. They say, listen, that's how things have been working for decades, right? And I'm not going to be the one who's going to try to solve such well-established reality here in Rio de Janeiro. But, the new governor, he did something, but he was very, very impactful on the city, sharing. Thank you for sharing. Yui, boa tarde, Yui. Has been a while. Good to see you. General Principal. Boa tarde, Miss Oliveira. Boa tarde, General Principal. After purchasing a property in Brazil and waiting 1 to 2 months for the CRM, do you have a suggestion on how to pay bills, condo fees, utilities while waiting on the CRM? So, General Principal, there are some banks that are willing to open a bank account even before you get the card. Now, they would open a bank account for non-residents, right? So, ideally, you would have opened those bank accounts before applying for your CRM card, right? So I think you are still in the planning stage. So what I would recommend, General Principal, is for you to get a non-resident bank account. You get the non-resident bank account, you will get access, right, to Pix. Pix is the means of payment, right, that you can use to pay your condo fees, utilities, and other things. And then once you have the CRM, you should close the non-resident account because then you're going to be a resident, right? And then you're going to be able to open a regular bank account. But that's part of our process, right? So we have a very well-established process in which one of the things we assist you with during the course of the property acquisition is to help you open the non-resident bank account, okay? And just to, share, a couple of the names, right? There is BTG, Boy, Tango, Gate, BTG Bank. This is one of the banks that typically open non-resident bank accounts for foreign citizens. And the second one is Banco Rendimento, right? Banco Rendimento is one of our partners at the firm, and we've been working with Banco Rendimento in lots of real estate transactions, okay? So take note, General Principal, BTG and Banco Rendimento. Now, if you come to work with us, we help you set up the bank accounts. We work directly with the banks, and we streamline the bank account opening. All right, General Principal. Yui, so How does this news affect the summer tourist season and carnival season? Better to live in other cities to avoid issues. Do you think there will be more of these raids next few months? Yui, I don't think it affects at all, right? Like, I mean, again, this is something very particular to the Brazilian culture. People just accommodate things, right? It does not matter how terrible they are. Brazilians, they are going to accommodate things and just live their lives happily, right? So there could be other raids, but I don't think this is going to impact on the tourist or carnival season. Okay, Yui, and honestly, like, I mean, this type of thing. This one was more extreme, but every now and then there is some kind of occurrence in Rio de Janeiro related to uh, uh, those drug dealer gangs, right? So this is not something new, okay? Unfortunately, right? So I don't think this is gonna affect much. And to tell you the truth, like those who like Rio de Janeiro, they are familiar with those issues, and I don't think they are gonna change their minds because of that. Now, on the other hand, there are many clients, Yui, who say, listen, I don't want to go to Rio de Janeiro. I want to go to, Florianopolis instead, right? Like in Florianopolis, you don't have such a reality. And so that's a reason for people to prefer other areas, okay? That's an interesting question for sure. Josh Yolas, right, Josh? Whenever you get your questions, could you talk broadly about taxes for a U.S. citizen working as digital nomad in Brazil? All right, I like it broadly, right, Josh? Like Josh got the message. Just repeating for those of you who were not at the beginning of the live stream, I'm free to discuss topics in general. I'm not allowed to discuss things, in details, right? Particularly if you give me a fact pattern, because in Brazil, just like in Portugal, right, but not in the United States, in Brazil, we are not supposed to give free advisory, and therefore I can comment about things in general, but I cannot give you specific advisory on your specifics. So Josh got the message. Thank you for the kindness, Josh, and I can certainly discuss in broad terms, right? So first thing, the digital nomad, Josh, is not gonna create a tax residency, but unfortunately, is not gonna shield you from tax residency as well. Meaning that the digital nomad visa or residency is gonna be neutral from a taxation perspective. So let's set that aside and then let's talk about how you become a tax resident. There are two main triggers. One trigger is going to be the 183-day rule, meaning that in any moving 12-month period of time, so it's not a calendar year. Within any moving 12-month period of time, if you exceed 183 days in Brazil, consecutive or not, you're going to be considered a tax resident, okay? And when you are considered as a tax resident, it means that your global income is going to be assessed by the Brazilian tax authority and potentially be taxed in accordance to the Brazilian tax code. Okay, there is a second major trigger, right? I'm just talking about the two main triggers. The second major trigger is going to be when you become a permanent resident in Brazil. When you become a permanent resident, you become a tax resident on the spot, meaning that even if you're just for a couple of months in Brazil, you're not gonna become a tax resident on day 184 because you're gonna become even sooner, even earlier, because you became a permanent resident. Right? So we said, global income. So there is no such a thing as, well, I'm just going to pay, taxes on my Brazilian income. That's not how it works. And before someone asks me about that, the United States has a treaty with Brazil to exchange income information, right? So very interesting. There is no tax treaty between Brazil and the United States like to eliminate double taxation, but there is a treaty to exchange information to catch those who are not paying their taxes, right? Now, also interesting to note, most of the time we don't see double taxation occurring because both Brazil and the United States and many other countries, they are going to have an approach in which the taxes that you are paying in the country in which you are getting your income is going to be credited against your tax liability in the other country, right? So in our fact pattern, let's say if you're making money in the United States, right, because you're working remotely and you're living in Brazil, so the federal taxes, not state, okay, not state, not city, but the federal taxes you pay in the United States, these would potentially be credited against your tax liability in Brazil, right? And from a very simplified manner, let's say if your tax bracket in the United States is 20% in federal taxes, right? And you're paying 20% tax bracket in the US, in Brazil, you would be on the highest bracket possible, which is 27.5. So again, from a very simplified perspective, your tax liability would be 7.5% because you're getting the credit for the 20 that you paid in the United States, so you're just going to pay 7.5 in Brazil. That's not exactly how it works, but from a high-level perspective, that's the concept. All right, Josh, I hope that was helpful. Let me know if you have any follow-up questions. Ahmed, hello, Dr. Oliveira. In a property deal where the seller has a fiduciary lien and plans to use the buyer's earnest money to pay it off, what legal safeguards should protect the buyer? Ahmed, I'm not sure if it is Ahmed, our client, but good to see you over here, Ahmed. And that's a somewhat common situation, okay? And just let me elaborate for the other members of our audience, right? Like it goes more or less like this. You're going to buy a property from a Brazilian seller, and the property has a lien on it, right? There is a mortgage that the seller secured in the past, and there is an open balance, right? So in the contract, what you're going to do, in the contract, you're going to have two main payments. One payment is going to be to cover the open balance for the mortgage, and the second payment you're going to typically pay at closing. Okay, so that's more or less the payment flow in terms of how to protect the buyer. One of the things you can do is naturally, right? You're not going to be paying any mortgage balances before you have an ironclad contract signed until you did all the due diligence on the property, on the sellers, and everything else. So whenever you get to this point that you're paying the balance, you have a legally binding contract signed. You know that you're dealing with let's say honest sellers, right? And at that point, you're gonna pay directly to the bank. So that's something else we do here at the firm. It doesn't always work like this. Like whenever you're doing this by yourself or with other providers. But here at the firm, we make a point in terms of only paying to the bank, right? So you're not gonna give your money to the seller. You're going to actually, get the payment coupon directly from the bank. So you know that you are actually paying off the mortgage directly to the bank. And once you paid the mortgage, it's going to take a while for the title to have the lien removed. Once the lien is removed, then you can attend closing. At closing, you're going to pay the balance to the seller, right? And then that's how it works. Now, again, talking about protection of the buyer, ideally, the balance for this mortgage is not going to be most of the purchase price, right? Let's think about a property, for instance, that is being sold for 1 million reais. Okay, ideally, the mortgage balance is going to be 200 or 300,000, right? Because then you're paying, like, the bulk of the money you're going to be paying at closing. However, we did see some transactions in the past in which the mortgage would be like 70 or 80% of the purchase price, and in this case, the risk is higher, right? Because you're paying like most of the price you're paying upfront, right? So we don't like much, but sometimes the buyer is in love with that property, and then it's a matter of assessing how much you want that property or not, right? Ok, Brasil Vibes, thank you, Brasil Vibes. Brasil Vibes, so good to see you. Boa tarde, Miss Oliveira. Boa tarde, Brasil Vibes. For foreigners who choose the retirement visa route after the visa is approved, how soon can the foreigner purchase a home, real estate property in Brazil? Thank you for buying me lunch, Brasil Vibes. Always generous. Brasil Vibes, so you don't need any type of special residency in Brazil to buy real estate. Okay, you could actually buy a property even as a visitor, right? Of course, there are several documents that you need legalized. There is a substantial level of red tape and bureaucracy whenever you're buying a property in Brazil, and that's just natural that you're gonna have, not a hard time, but you're gonna go through certain processes and requirements and paperwork and sometimes aggravation. Why not saying the real nature of those procedures in Brazil, but you don't need to be a legal resident. Okay, now the advantage of being a legal resident. So in your example, right? Let's say you secured the retirement visa/residency in Brazil, is that in a couple of years you could potentially qualify for a mortgage, right? Particularly if you are filing your taxes correctly. So if you are relying on a pension or Social Security from the United States, and you're declaring those amounts in your tax filings in Brazil, guess what? Next time you go to apply for a mortgage in Brazil, they're going to look at your residency. They're going to say, all right, I can tell Brasil Vibes is a legal resident, thumbs up. Well, I can tell Brasil Vibes has a decent stream of income because I can see his tax filings in Brazil. I'm not talking about your tax return in the US, right? I'm talking about your tax return in Brazil, okay? So all of those things, plus your purchases, maybe you got a card from a bank and you are, paying your bills, so your credit score in Brazil, it's increasing. All of those things, they are going to help you secure a mortgage. Now, if you are a cash buyer, Brasil Vibes, there are not that many differences, if you will. All right, I hope it makes sense. Let me know if you have any follow-up questions. All right, Ahmed, I'm applying for an investor visa via property purchase processed by a strict Brazilian consulate. If the seller won't share their full tax return, IRPF, what alternative documents can still support the visa? Ahmed, very interesting question. We are starting to get into details, so I'm just going to try to keep it broad. So it doesn't become like a legal consultation. But listen, you know the channels you can use, and I would be very happy to answer those questions to you in a call, right? So just keep that in mind. But talking in general, okay, Ahmed, talking in general, the tax return typically is not required for the visa process. The tax return is going to be required for the money transfer. Okay, so most banks in Brazil handling the currency exchange, they are going to require the seller's tax return to make sure that the seller is filing their taxes. That's first thing. And the second thing, that the property is showing up on the tax return. So this is not as much about immigration as it is about the real estate transaction, okay? Now, this said, there are transactions here at the firm in which we are able to get the money component solved, meaning the currency exchange, even when the seller does not provide the tax return, right? We have still a high percentage of success. I think it's probably, around 90 or 95%. It is just that we cannot guarantee that the transaction is going to work. And by the way, we can never guarantee that transaction is going to work, right? At the end of the day, the Brazilian bank handling the currency exchange, they have a discretion in terms of when to accept a transaction or not. But what I can tell you is that nowadays, Ahmed, yes, there are transactions in which we have been able to accomplish the currency exchange even when the seller does not provide the tax return. All right, I hope that makes sense. Consider scheduling a call so we can discuss about your case in details, Ahmed. All right, Muhammad. Welcome, Muhammad. Muhammad just say hi. Probably something in the works, right, Muhammad? Anna's Malik. Hi, Anna. Hello, I have a U.S. LLC. If the monthly income comes from my U.S. Wise account to my personal account, so will I be able to get the digital nomad visa if my salary comes more than 1,500? Right. So it's coming from your U.S. Wise account to your personal account. Okay. Yeah, that's. I'm just going to discuss in general and see if that helps a little bit. So we're talking about the digital nomad visa, right? So for the digital nomad visa, when it comes to the money component, the Brazilian immigration is going to give you two alternatives. One alternative is to show that you have funds in excess of 18,000 US dollars. So if you have or at least 18,000, right? So if you have 18,000, 19,000 US dollars sitting in your bank account, it gotta be a banking account, right? Don't say, well, I have investments, I have stocks, I have Bitcoin. No, it gotta be liquid funds in your bank account. So if you have this amount, you're good. You don't need to show that you are being paid anything at all, right? You're just showing that you have the funds. That's one possibility. The other one is that you are making at least 1,500 a month. Okay, when you pick this track, then what we do here at the firm, we're gonna show 3 months of bank statement, and we need the payments coming into your personal bank account from the entity that is providing the letter of verification. Okay, so that's a common check we see being done by the Brazilian immigration. Let's say if your letter of verification is coming from company ABC, all right, so company ABC is saying that John Doe works every month as a web designer and he's being paid $1,600 a month. That's the letter of verification, right? So in John's bank statements, it should show company ABC paying John $1,600 every month, right? The minimum is $1,500. 16 is just like our example, but the minimum is the $1,500. All right, Enes, I hope that was helpful. Josh, in the U.S., there are exemptions to avoid the double tax. Did you say that Brazil also has these mechanisms? It seems the U.S. requires expats to still pay things like Medicare, Social Security regardless. So the things that you see in the United States, they do not match the things that Brazil will offer, right? Like the two countries, they have, naturally, right, like broad discretion in terms of how to structure their tax codes. So what we see is that, like in the United States, you're gonna have exemptions, you're gonna have credits that are not gonna match what you have in Brazil, and vice versa. What we see in terms of reducing the double taxation or trying to avoid the double taxation, Josh, is going to be more the credit that I told you about, right? So if you're paying federal taxes to the United States, typically Brazil is going to accept, this amount that you paid to the United States as a credit to be applied against your tax liability in Brazil. There are nuances, right? There is this concept of tax buckets, right? It's not just like a general tax number, but typically, whenever they allow you to apply this credit, it's going to be between typical or certain types of accounts and not like across the board. But that's the main mechanism of avoiding double taxation, Josh. It is by allowing you to, use as a credit whatever you paid in federal taxes in the other country. Okay, general principle, Mr. Oliveira, what are your thoughts on pros and cons of leasing long-term rental versus short-term rentals in Brazil? General principle, so, like longer term, less headache, right? Like, I mean, if you're doing short-term, I would think, most people, they would avoid, to do the management themselves. They would probably prefer to have a professional management. But when you get a professional management, typically you're gonna, pay, I think it's like about 20%, is between 15 to 20%. I never saw any management company for short terms doing just 10, right? Like the ones I saw already, they charge between 15 to 20% of the revenues. And on top of that, you're also going to have the percentage that you're going to need to pay Airbnb or Booking.com, right? So it's more 10%. You also have taxes, right? So when you're doing short term, like the amount that you're getting, before those deductions is going to be substantially higher than the long term. But once you start to pay, all of those folks, right? Like, the tax man, the management company, repairs, like the difference it starts to become less meaningful. Okay, so long term, typically when you're doing long term, everything is on the tenant, meaning that the tenant, is going to pay for everything. The tenant is going to, maintain the property, right? And you're not going to need necessarily to pay a management company. When you pay a real estate agency, in this case, for long term, they do work with 10%, right? The 15 to 20% is more like the management companies specializing on short term, okay? So, these are two different approaches among our clients. Like we have clients who say, listen, I would rather have someone who's doing longer term because then I know that I have this more consistent stream of income. There is not going to be as much need for maintenance as, I will have to pay for short term, because short term naturally, right? You have like a larger number of people coming to the property. Some of them, they are not careful as the others. And so these are some of the factors that you could consider. All right. All right, Ahmed. Yes, sir. I am your client, and between thank you for all your services. Your team are doing a fantastic job. Thank you so much, Ahmed. Thank you for confirming. So if you are our client, guess what? You just booked the call with me. As you know, there is no additional cost, right? Like we are on the call to assist you whenever you need. So just let us know and we can get in a call and discuss those aspects of the seller not wanting to provide the tax return. All right, Ahmed, we want you to be able to make an informed decision, and we feel positive about your case. Thank you for the kind words. Right, Josh, understood. Thank you for the clarification. We are going to hire accountants to do this. We just wanted to know if we should plan to pay extra taxes or not. Absolutely, Josh. I think it's important to have at least a high level understanding of the taxation right before pulling the trigger. I absolutely agree. Now, just a perspective, right? Like as you probably know, we work not only with Brazil, but we also work with Portugal. And in Portugal, taxes they get up to 45%, right? So I think that Brazil, by capping the taxes like on 27.5, is not that bad, right? It's not that bad of a deal. Again, you can deduct what you pay in federal taxes from your tax liability. So I think Brazil remains a pretty good deal from the taxation perspective. Okay, now if you pick in Portugal, then get prepared to pay up to 45% in personal taxes. All right, there you go. Anna says, actually, I owned a U.S. LLC. My main point is, would I be able to get the digital nomad visa if the salary come from my company's bank account to my personal account? As now I'm living in Cambodia. Anna, we have specific strategies for business owners, okay? But, just as a general principle, whenever you are applying, you should focus on yourself as an individual, okay? Like the Brazilian immigration is very specific in a sense that they don't want to know about your business, right? They are not asking for articles of incorporation. They are not asking for explanations about how you run your business. So typically here at the firm, we're going to present you as a regular digital nomad. And again, if your company is company ABC, like the explanation I shared over here, you should, apply to a situation like that as well. All right, and consider, like, if you want to discuss in details, feel free to schedule a consultation and we can go over our strategy. Brazil Vibes, Mr. Oliveira, follow-up question. If the foreigner chooses the retirement visa route, does the minimum purchase amount for real estate in Brazil apply? 1 million in the south, 700,000 in the northeast. Not at all, Brazil Vibes. That's an interesting question, right? So those minimum amounts, they are specifically for the real estate investment visa. Now, if you have access to the Brazil retirement visa, guess what? You don't need the retirement. You don't need the investment visa, right? Because you have the retirement, and therefore you can pick any price bracket that you want, right? Like particularly if you buy in the Northeast, like 1 million reais for most of the country is not much. But sometimes, 700,000, particularly depending on where you are choosing in the Northeast, sometimes, is going to get you really high-end properties, or depending on the town, like you're not going to even find a property to buy for that amount, just because most of the properties, they are going to have a lower price tag, all right? But again, if you're getting the retirement visa, you're good. You don't need to worry about the minimum requirement. All right, Dr. Tisto, hello, I'm applying for a Brazil retirement visa. I'm confused about how to have my Social Security benefit letter apostilled, since it is not a state document, but a federal document. All right, so federal documents, they do have a place for apostilles, and that's the State Department of the United States. Okay, that's gonna be the same thing as the FBI background check. So if you get an FBI background check, and if you send it to Austin, right, like in Austin, that's where you have a Texas Secretary of State, right? It depends on the state. Like some states, they have a Secretary of State handing the apostille. Other states, they are going to have the Department of State. So if you send an FBI background check to Austin, Texas is not going to touch the document. Say, listen, this thing is federal. Like, I mean, I'm not going to mess with a federal document, right? So in this case, you've got to send this document to Washington, D.C., and then in Washington, D.C., the U.S. Department of State will be in charge of handling the apostille service, okay? And we typically not only advise our clients on that, but we actually drive the document flow on behalf of our clients, right? You still pay for the apostille service naturally, right? Like these are out-of-pocket costs, but we drive the whole sequence, and we have providers in Washington, D.C., right? So naturally, you don't need to go to Washington, D.C. You could just say, listen, this is my Social Security, get it done. And then our team would get this done for you without you having to figure out, where to send a federal-based document. But interesting question for sure. All right, Josh, last question, and thank you again. Josh, keep the questions coming. As long as I can discuss from a broad level, they are always welcome. Last question, and thank you again. These streams are so helpful. Thank you, Josh. Any tips for the interview step when extending tourist visa? We are in São Paulo, if that matters. Josh, there are several documents you need to take with you. And there is a page, like it is in Portuguese, but nowadays with ChatGPT, you could easily translate into English and even ask ChatGPT to find you the target page, right? But they have a list of things that you're going to need to provide, right? So make sure that you're taking everything to the interview, because if you don't take everything, they are going to deny your extension. So that would be my first tip. The second tip is to make sure that you do qualify for an extension. This could come as a surprise, but Brazil immigration is based on the nationality of the applicant, right? So depending on where you are from, we're gonna make some things available and others not. All right, so extension is gonna be one of those things. So I'm gonna give an example, right? Like for Europe, for many Europeans, Brazil is not going to allow an extension, okay? So even if you have all the paperwork, even if you pay the fee, even if you attended the appointment, the answer is going to be always no, okay? And now if you are from countries in which the extension is allowed, like the United States is one of them, typically, as long as you take all the documents, right, and you are, respectful during the appointment, you're gonna get the extension. Okay, I hope that was helpful. James Rochas, can I renew the digital nomad visa for the third time? Is the norm in Brazil? Any alternative? James, so very common question as well. When the digital nomad was conceived, it was conceived under the prior federal administration. It was conceived for a single renewal. But the federal administration is no longer in power. And what we see about the new one is that they are not necessarily tracking how many times you are renewing. Okay, so yes, we do have clients renewing for a second time, meaning they are on their third year of the digital nomad, but we are unfortunately unable to tell you if this is a policy or that's just by chance. Okay, now I can tell you we have multiple clients securing their third year as a digital nomad. Now, if it's going to work with you, or if this approach is going to continue as is, unfortunately, we are unable to tell. Matt Gaines, to expand on Brazil Vibes question, if Adrian and I find a home in Brazil before we sell our home in the US, does Brazil not consider my US credit rating for mortgage? Matt, so most of the time, Brazil is not going to touch or acknowledge documents from abroad, okay? Particularly if you're dealing with like more conservative banks, such as, and Adrian may know about those banks, for instance, Caixa Econômica Federal, Bradesco, right? These are very conservative banks. I guarantee they are not going to even acknowledge. You could show credit score, you could show your tax filings in the US. It's not going to have any meaning to those banks, all right? Now, if you're dealing with a more global bank such as Santander, there is a chance that they could take those things into consideration. But I would say Santander is more like an exception. And the rule is that Brazilian banks in general, they don't take into consideration your history abroad, right? And that's why when I was addressing Brazil Vibes comments, I said, listen, once you get the retirement visa and you are living in Brazil, you're going to have your Brazilian credit score. And that's going to be helpful for your journey, like if you are getting a mortgage in Brazil, because now you are a legal resident through the retirement visa or residency. Guess what? Then they're going to look at you as a local, not just like, someone from abroad who's, dropping by, right? So that's the second relevant factor over here. And the third one, maybe the most important one, is that, let's say, after Brazil Vibes is living in Brazil, guess what? He's going to need to file taxes. And when you file taxes in Brazil, now you're going to have an evidence of income that's going to be accepted by most banks, or pretty much every bank, including the most traditional ones such as Bradesco and Caixa Econômica Federal. All right, I hope that was helpful. We have Marisa and Ricardo. Boa tarde, Dr. Luciano. Amamos ouvir suas lives straight from Portugal. So good to have you over here, Marisa and Ricardo. Thank you always for the support. Dr. Tissot, thank you, sir. Thank you for dropping by. I hope to see you again over here. Samuel, for anyone who wants to buy any property, you must first get your CPF number, and then that will help you. Nice sharing, Samuel. Yes. So the CPF is the Brazilian tax ID. Okay, somewhat similar to the U.S. Social Security number, but in the U.S., people are just crazy about protecting their Social Security number. And in Brazil, believe it or not, like you're going to actually share your CPF several times a day. For instance, if you go to a drugstore, invariably they are going to ask you for your CPF tax ID, right? So that's very shocking to foreign citizens. The first time they see this, eventually they get, they understand that this is typical in Brazil. Okay, but yes, the CPF is a must. Like you cannot acquire legal rights in real estate property unless you have the CPF tax ID. Thank you for chiming in, Samuel. General Principal, obrigado, Mr. Oliveira. Thank you for participating, General. James Rochas, thanks for the honest opinion. Any alternative for a digital nomad who wants to settle in Brazil? I don't have money to buy property here. All right, James, so the digital nomad, well, I never told you could not get for a third time, James. I just said it is uncertain, right? But let me emphasize, most of our clients are getting their third renewal, all right? So keep it the positive, have a positive mindset about the renewal, and just take from there, all right? And if you need us, to help you with the renewal, something else, that is kind of helpful in my opinion is that whenever we are filing for a renewal, The filing comes from our law firm, like we sign a paper saying that we have verified the documents, that we are vouching for the candidate, right? Like, I mean, I'm not going to say that this is going to be enough to approve a bad candidate, but if there is a more, like gray area type of situation, this could be, like the push needed to get you through the finish line, right? So if you are concerned about the approval chances, consider using a law firm. It could be ours. If it is ours, we're going to be pleased to assist you, or any other law firm that is specialized in this area and that you feel comfortable with. All right, Matt Gaines, obrigado. We'll plan to sell here first so that we can be cash buyers. All right, Matt. And, just a tip in general, right? Like, I'm not talking about you. I'm just talking about in general. And that's something that always surprises me. People will sometimes, like settle for things without having enough exposure to a certain area, right? And in my experience, that's something that I see happening on a repetitive basis. Once people settle in a certain country, after a while, they are going to have a completely different view of the country, of the different locations, and they are going to want to relocate. Okay, so from this perspective, Matt, again, I'm not talking about specifically about you, but in general, sometimes we recommend people to start with a rental. Right? Start with a rental. Make sure that you like the destination. Travel elsewhere. To see all the options that you have. Brazil, it has continental dimensions, right? Like Brazil is bigger than the United States if you remove Alaska and Hawaii, right? So Brazil is huge. Brazil is as big as a continent, and I typically recommend people to wait. Hold on buying a property before, and to first make sure that they know exactly where they want to settle, and then they can make a good purchase, right? That's a recommendation we have in general, not only for Brazil, but very often for Portugal. Right? I don't know why, but for Portugal, many times we have consultations. People are getting started with the visa process without ever traveling to Portugal, right? And that's not good because for Portugal, one of the components, one of the requirements for your visa application is that you write a personal letter explaining why you want to go to Portugal. And I think it's going to be very difficult for people to make a good case without ever traveling to Portugal, right? So, but going back to Brazil, so Brazil, it's even more challenging. Like Portugal, you can probably, know the entire country in a couple of months, right? You can travel pretty much everywhere in a couple of months. Not Brazil. Brazil, you would need, probably years, several years, and you wouldn't be able to visit every area in the country. But you could potentially understand the very different areas, such as the Northeast, the North, the South, right? And so that's, some sharing for you guys. All right, Matt, I hope that was helpful. Obrigado. We will absolutely rent for a while first. That's good to know, Matt. There you go. Donald, Brazil. All right. Nice sharing, Donald. That's a kind of, interesting wording, right? Like, I mean, it reminds me of soccer matches. We have a very specific narrator, right? Like whenever he's narrating soccer matches, like particularly for the World Cup, he's going to say something like this, Brazil, ziu, and it sounds just like this. Very interesting. All right. Let me remind you, if you want to like our live stream, right, it does help with our business, and it does help with other people just like you to find our content. So if you are enjoying the live stream, please do me a favor. Click the like button. That's going to be appreciated. And before I forget, I'm going to share about our partner Remax in Rio de Janeiro. That's a very specific Remax agency. That's Remax Nomad States. They are doing a great job with many of our clients. You get, like international level realtor services, and because they are working with us, particularly, if they are getting someone who met them through us, they will do their best to follow the same standards that we follow whenever handling real estate transactions on behalf of our clients. Unfortunately, in Brazil, many people will cut corners. Unfortunately, it's not that rare to find people losing their shirts. Brazil doesn't have an escrow, and Brazil does not have title insurance, right? And therefore, there is a really high need for you to work with trustworthy professionals, right? And I can vouch for Remax Nomad States. There you have, their contact information, and you can, follow up directly with them and see how they can help you find the ideal property. All right, let me take a look and see if we have any final participations. Yes, we do not. So let me share with you. Our next live stream is going to be next week. I believe November the 5th is going to be the same time, right? 12:30 Rio de Janeiro time. But I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, that in the United States, I think there is a time change. So just keep that in mind that, next week for U.S. Audience, the time is going to be different, right? Not the Brazilian time. Brazilian time remains 12:30 Rio de Janeiro time, but whatever time is for you in the U.S., I think there are 4 different time zones, right? So whatever is your time zone in the United States is not going to be the same time as today. It's going to be potentially, I think, 1 hour less, right? So let's say if you are in the central time zone, it could be 9:30 a.m. instead of 10:30 a.m. in the morning, if that makes sense. All right. All right, Josh, do you have a rough estimate for how long it takes to secure the digital nomad after we hire your firm? Josh, there are some timelines. The whole journey usually takes about 6 months, right? But typically, you're going to have the protocolo, which is the printout of your residency number, in about 3 months. Okay, another piece of information for you, because I think you asked about the extension, right? Like as soon as we file, Josh, an extension, we stop the clock. Okay, Brazil, and by the way, just like in the United States, once you file a petition for an immigration benefit, typically you're going to stop the clock and you're going to be allowed to stay in the country to wait for the result of that application, right? So if you work with us, we file, like for the digital nomad, and then you're good to stay in Brazil during the course of this process, all right? And let's go to our final participation of the day. Luciano, you have made videos regarding wire money to Brazil to purchase property and the challenges. Can someone simply take traveler's checks with them? Donald, not that I know, right? Traveler's checks, you will need, to sell those checks to a currency exchange bank. Okay, like usually, banks in general, right? Like traditional banks like Bradesco, Banco do Brasil, Caixa Econômica, they would not take a traveler's check. And, even if you're using traveler's check, the recipient bank, let's say you find a couple of currency exchange specializing banks willing to take your traveler's check, they would make you go through a whole compliance process, okay? They wouldn't just, say, all right, like because you have the traveler's check, I don't need to worry, here is like 100,000 US dollars in Brazilian reais, right? So they would make you go through the same compliance process that you would go through if you had wired the funds from your Chase bank account to Brazil. Okay, Donald, but that's an interesting take. Just remember, Donald, that for smaller amounts, right? Like, I mean, if you're sending up to $10,000, there are the so-called, money apps, like, and I'm sure you know about that, about TransferWise, nowadays JustWise. There is Remitly, Payoneer, there are many others. So for certain amounts, that would potentially work for a traveler check. They would also potentially work for those apps, all right, if the amount is not much. All right, I want to say thank you to all of you. Very interesting participations. Thank you, Brazil Vibes, for buying me lunch today. Thank you for the generosity. And I hope to see you guys again next Wednesday. And we